This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, John Rowda back again with episode 42, and today I want to talk about time. We're in a little series, I'm calling it my little podcast Blitz, 5 episodes in 5 days about fate, focus, assets, time, and energy, and how to manage those properly to boost your productivity. And today I want to talk about time. I actually been asked a lot of times about time management, and I've given a few talks on time management before. I would not say I'm an expert at time management. I actually probably do things pretty inefficiently, but there are a few things that I do that are pretty efficient, and there are some things that I do that help us manage my time a little bit better. So some people will say, well, John, how do you manage your time? You work a full-time job, you teach part-time, you build apps, you host a podcast, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And how do you do all these things? Well, a lot of that's just because of time management and how I manage my time. We all have the same amount of time. We all have a finite amount. We all know it's 24 hours in a day if you're on Earth, and that 24 hours is the same. I have the same 24 hours that you do. It's just how we choose to use that. So one of the things that I've got, I'm putting this in the show notes, so if you go to ageekleader.com and search for time, you'll see this, but there's a link to a time tracking template in Excel that I actually made some of my students at Winthrop University do. I do this regularly every semester. But essentially, you break out where you're putting your time. And the advantage of this is it helps people, see, hey, oh my gosh, I'm wasting so much time here, or I'm spending too much time on this thing and that thing, and it helps you prioritize your time a little bit better. And just a little secret, I do this every semester myself. And a big reason of that is because your schedules change, your activities change, your priorities change. And the first time I did this, probably it was probably 8 or 9 years ago, the first time I actually did this exercise, I was shocked to see how much time I spent in the car. And I was like, wow, I am spending, several hours a week in the car. And at the time I wasn't reading any books. And I thought, well, how can I improve my time management when it comes to, information, learning things? And that's when Audible came in, and I, got an Audible subscription so that I could use that time in the car. And now I use it for podcasts and different things. I also noticed that I watched a lot of TV, and the first time I did this was during the fall. It was during football season, so I was watching the Eagles play a lot. I was watching a lot of football, a lot of college football, NFL football, and I realized that I was spending probably 10 hours a week watching football. So I cut that back and reduced the amount that I watch when it comes to sports in general. And it was just a really eye-opening exercise. So when you're doing this, one thing I would recommend is block everything out in 15 to 30-minute intervals and categorize those things, whether it's work-related, whether it's family time, whether it's side hustle time, whether it's self-improvement. When you're at work, then drill deeper. So what I do is I color code the big categories. Then within those categories, I put in the details. So family time could be eating dinner, it could be entertainment, watching TV, et cetera, and categorize those within that block. And you'll find some pretty eye-opening things that you can adjust to help you better manage your time. So another thing that I do when I'm managing my time is I think of time like a budget. Now, I talked about budgets in the past episode with assets. Time budget is extremely important. So always equate time to money. Think about how much things cost and how much your time is worth, and try to put those together. So I'll get into some tips. That'll be my first tip when it comes to time management in just a second. But also create a time chart. A chart, not just the Excel spreadsheet template that logs your time, but a chart of when you want to spend time doing different things, and put limits on those times. So when you think about a time budget, put a limit of how much time you're going to spend doing different things. So when I started doing this podcast, I put a limit of how many hours per week I was going to spend on the podcast. And there's a few exceptions to that. This week would be one exception of that. But I put a limit of 4 hours per week doing side hustle work in general. So podcast, whether it's building a website for someone on the side, whether it's doing a mobile app, whatever, speaking at an event or at a conference, all those things fall into my side hustle bucket. I have a cap of 4 hours per week that I'll do on side hustles, and not any more than that. So I could use all that 4 hours in one evening if I stay up late working on something that I'm excited about, or I could break that out to 4 1-hour segments during my lunch break at work, or something to that effect. So there's many different ways that you can kind of break apart your time, but put put budgets around how much time that you're spending. Another thing that I did is I put a hard stop on certain things. I used to just let my work hours bleed into the evening sometimes, that I wouldn't get home until later. And I put a hard cap on that and said, hey, I need to spend more time with my family, so I'm cutting back on certain things. I'm leaving work 5:36. I'm not going to check work email. I'm not going to take any calls, et cetera, until my kids go to bed. Put a hard limit on that. So I want to go through 10 tips that I have for time management. So these 10 tips are just kind of high level, just to go through my time management. I probably should do a time management talk. Usually those talks are about an hour long. I don't want this episode to bleed into an hour, so I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. Number one, I've already mentioned, equate time to money. Create a time budget. Think about your time, how you spend your time, and budget allocations. You wouldn't, if you created a budget for work, when we're talking about assets, we talked about, you create categories of things that you budget for. Maybe you budget a certain number of dollars for going out to eat. You budget a certain number of dollars for your cable bill, your internet bill, your entertainment. You wouldn't spend more than that. So do the same thing with time. Put budgets of how much time you're going to do, working on house projects, working on meetings at work, and so on and so forth, and don't go over that. All right, understand Pareto's Law. Pareto's Law is the 80-20 rule, and we talked a little bit about this, and I think it was episode 36 on the Respond and Don't React episode. But I want to talk some more about using the 80-20 rule and understand that 80% of your results is probably going to come out of 20% of the effort, and the last 20% takes a bulk of work to get to it. So understand that whenever you're doing certain projects, and see what you can do to only do the 80% that's most important up front, and then validate things before going ahead and doing that last 20% to get to the 100% completion. Number 3, create daily to-do list. I use the Reminder app in my iPhone. I have a reminders list called Today. And usually the night before, I put in 3 things that I want to do before lunch. And usually I try to get those 3 things done before I check email, because there's one thing that will train wreck your day, and that is Outlook. You open up your email and you're going to have distraction after distraction after distraction coming to attack you. So try to knock off those 3 things before lunch. They're usually simple things, like return a phone call, schedule something with a colleague. But there are 3 simple things that I need to do, and I want to get those done before lunch. It could be write a report, summarize something. Now, you may say, well, I need Outlook to do some of those things. Absolutely, but don't read it. You just have to have self-discipline not to read the emails that are coming in until after you knock off those 3 things. Next up, set SMART goals. I talked about SMART goals in episode 19 on how to set SMART goals. So set your SMART goals. You definitely want to make sure that what you do with your SMART goals are important. And by SMART goals, what I mean is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound goals. So they need to be specific to whatever you're targeting. Not just get better, but get better at what and how much better. Like instead of saying, we need to improve customer service, we say we need survey results to improve customer survey rating by X number of percentage by a certain date, which kind of hits the time-bound portion of the SMART goals. Must be measurable. You must have a way of measuring this goal to know that you've achieved it or didn't achieve it. Has to be achievable, realistic in nature, something that you can actually do yourself. And again, it has to be time-bound. So you have to have a time limit on achieving this goal. Also, when you're setting goals, I try to break out my types of goals into 3 different types. Step goals, which step goals are small goals, things that you can achieve in a single day, usually a 1-task goal, a 1 step to get you moving in the right direction. So going back to the running example that I used before, you want to set a step goal. It could be just buying shoes, putting on shoes. That's your step goal for the day. You wouldn't have a step goal of running a marathon, right? Unless you're a seasoned runner and you run marathons every day. But your step goal would be something for today. Maybe your step goal the next day will be running a mile. Okay, and your sprint goals will be medium goals. Those will be goals that'll take up to 2 weeks. So think about Scrum or Agile when you're talking about your sprints. So what is the goal that I can do in 2 weeks? So for me, it may be I want to run 6 times in 2 weeks. That would be 3 times per week. That would be a good sprint goal. And if you want to use that as a SMART goal, you'll say, I want to run 3 times per week of at least 1 mile by this date. All right, and then your stretch goals are going to be larger goals. Those are made up of multiple sprints, and those can be a quarter, a year. Maybe you have a stretch goal of running a 5K, and then you'll create a new stretch goal if you want to continue your running to running a 10K in the fall, and then maybe next year running a marathon or half marathon or something like that. So those would be some examples of setting SMART goals. Next up, tackle your most uncomfortable task first. And this is an old saying that you hear, that if you ever have to eat 3 frogs, eat the biggest, ugliest one first. Same thing is true with any kind of task that you have to do. Don't necessarily do the thing that takes the longest or is the hardest. Take the thing that you're most uncomfortable with. So for me, it may be confrontation or one-on-ones. So do those first. Knock those out so that you feel a sense of accomplishment of achieving something that was difficult for you, but also that puts you in a easier job to do the rest of the things on your to-do list. All right, batch your request and task. Batching is extremely important when it comes to getting things done. I realized this when I had an employee that during our one-on-one several years ago. I asked him what his biggest frustration with me was, and he says, well, is that you interrupt me all the time. You're always asking me things. And so I made a point at that, going forward, and I realized how effective this is to batch things. So instead of, interrupting him 3 times, I would make a list of things and then, once or twice per day say, hey, here are the 4 things that I have for you today, and just knock them out. Instead of every time something came up, send him a Slack message. That's not a good way. Wait until right before lunch, and then send him a Slack message with the 4 things that you need. That way you're not interrupting him 4 times before lunch. You can also batch emails, checking your emails in intervals instead of leaving Outlook open and checking them as they come in. Open Outlook at 11 o'clock, check from 11 to 11:30, close out, go to lunch. All right, email. Ooh, email is a time killer. It can be a huge distraction for most. Email only after you've done something. Get your 3 tasks done before opening Outlook and getting hit with the distractions. The biggest time zapper that I have is actually email, in my opinion. Next is number 8, understand efficiency versus effectiveness. Just because you do things fast doesn't mean it's the right thing. And when you're looking at time management, it's not always about being the most efficient. It's about doing the most effective thing. So just think about that. Whenever you're planning out your day and your tasks, don't just do the thing that you can do the best. Do what is the best thing to do. Number 9, don't procrastinate. And I refer to Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law is the law that states that the scope of the task will expand to fill the time allotted. Go ahead and knock out what you're doing, and just remember that if you wait to the last minute, things get expensive. I like to call this my FedEx example. If you want to send something and you have like 4 or 5 days, use FedEx Ground. It's cheaper. But if you have to get it there the next morning, or overnight, then FedEx overnight or early next morning are very expensive. It gets more expensive the sooner it has to be there. So don't procrastinate. Try to get things done earlier. It's usually cheaper and easier and less stressful. And last but not least, when it comes to things that matter, exchange money for time. This is something I got from the Randy Pausch time management lecture. And basically, he talks about how we can always earn more money, but the time we have on earth is limited. And once it's gone, we can never get that time back. So if something that you could do yourself takes you 3 hours, but you could pay someone $40 to do it, I would assume your time is probably worth more than $10. So pay them the $40 and let them do it. Use your time more wisely. So I mentioned Randy Pausch. If you don't know who Randy Pausch is, he passed away, but he was a computer science professor at Carnegie Mellon. He gave a pretty famous talk and wrote a book called The Last Lecture. That was his last talk. He had pancreatic cancer. But even after he gave his last lecture talk, he gave one more talk that is super powerful. It was Randy Pausch's time management talk. The cool thing about this talk is he gave this knowing he only had a few months to live. And now you might think, why would you give a time management talk? And he mentions that in the talk that he gave this because he told someone he would, and he's a man of his word. But he speaks from a perspective of, I know I have a finite amount of time, and I know it's running out. Here's how I manage it. And it's super powerful. It's super insightful. And now it is a little bit dated. He has pictures of CRT monitors. He has a couple of other things that I don't find as useful anymore when it comes to phone calls and such, but I do think it's a very powerful talk to pay attention to. So I'm putting that in the show notes as well. So again, if you just go to geekleader.com/time, you'll get this, and you will see Randy Posh's lecture in there and be able to listen to this show and refer back to it. Please send this to anybody that needs help with time management. I think this is helpful, and I really think the Randy Posh lecture would be helpful as well. And if you have any comments on how you improve your time management, send them to me at John Rauta at Twitter, or send me an email. You can do it at john@geekleader.com. That'll come straight to me. And please head over to iTunes, leave me a review and rating. That would be much appreciated and help share this podcast to the rest of the world. Thanks so much.